You know that feeling when you're holding a secret so big, so life-changing, it feels like it's giving off its own gravity? That was me, sitting in my ergonomic office chair, with a little black velvet box burning a hole in the pocket of my jacket. Every few minutes, my fingers would drift from the keyboard, where I'd been tracing the digital footprints of a corporate embezzler, and find their way to that small, soft lump. A quick touch was all it took. A reassurance. It's still there. The future is still there. My name is Liam Walsh, and I live in a world of numbers. As a forensic accountant, a week after I bought the ring, the first crack appeared. It wasn't a quake, just a hairline fracture, so fine I almost missed it. But I'm paid to notice the things people try to hide, and the change in Chloe's digital behavior was a blaring alarm in the silent, ordered universe of our shared life. It started on a Tuesday. We were on the couch, my arm around her, scrolling through a streaming service for a movie. Her phone, which was usually tossed carelessly onto the coffee table, was clutched in her hand like a lifeline. When she thought I was engrossed in the movie descriptions, her thumb would. The human mind is a fascinating, treacherous thing. For a week after Chloe's Bali announcement, mine became a battleground. My heart, that stubborn, sentimental organ, built fortresses of denial. You're being paranoid, Liam. This is what Evie's cynicism has done to you. She's planning a wedding. She's stressed. A girl's trip is normal. New passwords are responsible. You're going to sabotage your own happiness with your pathological need for order. But my brain, my cold, analytical, pattern-recognizing brain wouldn't stand down. It presented its evidence with the dispassionate clarity of a prosecutor. Exhibit A. The shift from open device policy to guarded secrecy. Exhibit B. The use of Santorini, a shared dream, as a tool of exclusion. Exhibit C. The disproportionate enthusiasm for a trip planned with a level of detail she usually reserves for last-minute brunch decisions. The conflict was a low-grade fever. I collapsed to my knees amidst the wreckage, the sobs racking my body. It was true. All of it. The lies, the theft, the affair. She wasn't just cheating. She was financing her new life, her new love, with the bricks of our future. She had taken our shared dream, sold it for a cheap fantasy, and left me holding the empty bag. I don't know how long I stayed there, kneeling in the ruins of my old life. But when the storm of grief finally began to subside, it left behind something new, something cold and hard and sharp. The pain was still there, a raw, open wound, but it was no longer the only thing I felt. Rising beside it, like a serpent uncoiling, was a different emotion, one I had never truly felt before, not like this. It was a pure, undiluted, and focused rage. I stood up, my legs shaky but determined. I looked at the cracked laptop, the shattered glass, the torn photo. This wasn't just a crime of the heart. It was a financial betrayal. Con job. And that was a language I understood perfectly. She wanted to play games with numbers? She wanted to steal a future? Fine. I would give her a lesson in consequences. I would show her what happens when you betray a man who builds his life on logic and data. The silence after I hung up with Evelyn was the loudest I have ever experienced. It wasn't an absence of sound. It was a presence. It was the roaring void where my future used to be, the phantom limb of a life amputated in a single brutal afternoon. I stood in the center of the living room, a statue of a man, surrounded by the glittering shards of the life I'd thought I had. My eyes swept the room, but I no longer saw our apartment. I saw a crime scene. The photo on the wall was no longer a happy memory. It was a piece of evidence, documenting the before. The cozy throw blanket was a prop. The half-finished candle on the coffee table was a scent designed to mask the rot. Every object had been stripped of its sentimental meaning and reclassified as a component of the lie. The initial volcanic rage had cooled, hardening into something more durable and far more dangerous. A cold, crystalline. I closed the laptop. The suite was dark, save for the city lights winking outside the window. I felt emptied out. The grief was still there, a dull, persistent ache, but it was buried under layers of strategy and cold intent. I was no longer a victim of the ruins. I was the architect, standing over the blueprints of a new structure, one built not on love, but on retribution. The foundation had been poured in betrayal and solidified with rage. Tomorrow I would begin to build the walls, and I would make sure that when it was complete, Chloe and Mark would have nowhere to run. The 10 days of her absence were a strange, suspended period of time, a liminal space between the man I was and the man I was becoming. I lived in the sterile hotel suite, my life reduced to a series of tactical maneuvers. By day, I was the consummate professional at work, my focus sharper than ever, as if the emotional void inside me had been filled with pure processing power. By night, I was the architect of ruin, refining my plans, building the digital traps, and steeling my nerves for the performance of a lifetime. I used the time to further secure my position. I met with Evelyn not as a grieving brother, but as a client presenting a case. I showed her the financial records, the social media evidence, the dossier on we, she said. The word was the obscenity. Later, as she unpacked, souvenirs from Bali emerged cheap, mass-produced trinkets that she must have bought at the airport on her layover. A wooden elephant, a batik scarf. She presented them to me with a flourish, and I accepted them with the gratitude of a man who believed the lie. "I'm just so happy to be home," she sighed, coming to hug me from behind as I pretended to look at the wooden elephant. She rested her head against my back. "It's funny. Being away just makes you realize what's truly important, you know?" I closed my eyes. The cynicism of the statement was so profound it was almost beautiful. She had just returned from a passionate affair, funded by my life savings, and she was giving me homilies about appreciating what you have. I placed my hands over hers, a cold, dead gesture. "I know exactly what you mean." The days following Chloe's return settled into a new, grotesque version of normal. We were actors sharing a stage, performing a play called Happily Ever After for an audience of one, each other. The difference was, I was the only one who knew the script was a lie. I moved through our life with a detached, clinical precision, every word, every touch, every smile a carefully chosen tool in my arsenal. Her affection was a nauseating pantomime. She was more attentive than she'd been in a year, her touches lingering, her laughter a little too bright. It was the performance of a woman who believed she had successfully pulled off the perfect crime and was now enjoying the spoil. The inheritance email acted on Chloe like a chemical catalyst, transforming her feigned affection into something far more potent and nauseating. A sycophantic, laser-focused greed. The next week was a masterclass in her avarice. She began referring to our inheritance in everyday conversation, her voice dripping with a proprietary tone. She started leaving luxury real estate magazines open on the coffee table, circles around properties that were far beyond what my actual salary could ever afford. "Just dreaming, baby," she'd say with a flutter of her eyelashes whenever I glanced at them. I played my part to perfection. The modest, cautious planner. "It's a lot of money, Chloe," I'd say, frowning. "We have to be smart. We can't just blow it on a house. We need to think long-term." This manufactured resistance was the perfect fuel for her impatience. She had convinced her own mother and father, good, solid people who had always liked me, to invest in the fantasy. The sheer depth of her deception was breathtaking. She wasn't just betraying me. She was dragging everyone who trusted her into the abyss. She presented the total to me like a trophy, her $20,000, combined with my fictional $250,000. $270,000. Our all-in commitment. "I'm so proud of us," she beamed, wrapping her arms around me. I held her, looking over her shoulder at the Valhalla Ventures dashboard on my screen. The progress bar was now full. The status read, "Funds verified. Investment active." "Me too, Chloe," I whispered into her hair, my voice flat and dead. "I'm so very proud of us." The con within the con was a success. She had stolen $45,000 from me, while Chloe was lost in her avaricious daydreams of doubling her money. I was descending deeper into the digital underworld, my focus shifting from the dupe to the predator. Mark Thorne, aka Marcus Edgar Thorne, was the unseen enemy, the variable in my equation that I couldn't fully control. To ensure my plan was airtight, I needed to understand him completely. I needed to know his pressures, his patterns, his breaking point. This wasn't just due diligence anymore. It was a preemptive strike. My initial dossier, built on public records and a basic background check, was a good start. But a con man of his caliber was a creature of habit, and his habits were his vulnerability. I needed to get inside his head, to see the world through his opportunistic. The air in our apartment grew thick with the scent of impending fortune. Chloe moved through the rooms with the fervent energy of a revivalist preacher, her faith placed entirely in the digital altar of the Valhalla Ventures client portal. She checked it first thing in the morning, last thing at night, and a dozen times in between. The sight of our committed funds, the glowing green progress bar, and the bold text proclaiming investment active, maturity date October 15th, was her daily sacrament. I, the high priest of this fabricated religion, watched her devotion with a chilling sense of satisfaction. Every time she cooed over the dashboard, she was hammering another nail into her own financial coffin. The $20,000 she had poured in, her life savings, her maxed-out credit, her parents' nest egg, was now a phantom, a string of code in a server I controlled, its only purpose to lure her into a false sense of security. But I knew Mark Thorne was the loose thread. A man like him, a scrambler, would see Chloe. The trap was no longer just set. It was armed. The walls were up, the door was locked from the outside, and she was inside, dancing in the middle of the room, counting her future millions. All that was left was to wait for the clock to run out, and for the beautiful, devastating illusion to dissolve into dust. The 3 months that followed were a study in surreal tension. The countdown on the Valhalla Ventures dashboard became the central clock of our lives, its digital numbers ticking down with a weight that only I could feel. Chloe's transformation was complete. She was no longer just my fiancée. She was a shareholder in a fictional empire, and her devotion to its success was absolute. She began spending money we didn't yet have with a breathtaking audacity. It started small. A designer handbag she had to have. The hours after the theft were a study in human collapse. Chloe didn't move from the floor for a long time. She was a shipwreck, her sobs eventually subsiding into a silent, trembling shock. The vibrant, greedy woman from that morning had been erased, replaced by a hollowed-out shell, her expensive dress a mocking costume for a tragedy. I played my part flawlessly. I paced. I ran my hands through my hair. I made frantic, pointless calls to the bank, having hushed, desperate conversations with fictional fraud departments. I was the picture of a man who had lost everything through his own foolish trust. My performance was a mirror, reflecting her despair back at her, but my own core remained a block of ice. "There has to be something we can do," she whispered, her voice raspy from crying. Her eyes were red-rimmed and wild, scanning the room as if the answer might be hidden. The days that followed the theft and Mark's abandonment were a descent into a special kind of hell, one of my own meticulous design. Chloe moved through our apartment like a ghost, her eyes perpetually red and swollen. The vibrant, demanding woman was gone, replaced by a listless, broken creature. She didn't bother with makeup. She wore the same sweatpants for 3 days. The silence between us was a heavy, suffocating blanket, broken only by the occasional gut-wrenching sob from the bedroom. I maintained my facade of shared devastation. I'd bring her cups of tea she didn't drink. I'd speak in hushed, somber tones about exploring our options, all the while knowing the only option left was the one I had prepared. My performance was a masterclass. "Who? Mark? What did he say?" "He didn't believe me," she whispered, her eyes fixed on a point on the far wall. "He said it was impossible for the money to just vanish. He said it was more likely that you had stolen it." The audacity of the man was breathtaking. He was turning my own narrative against me. "What?" I injected a perfect blend of outrage and hurt into my voice. "He said you never seemed that upset. He said a man who lost everything doesn't just make tea and file reports. He said it was all too neat." Her voice was shaking. "He said you must have orchestrated the whole thing, that you found out about us and this was your revenge." The fear in Chloe's eyes after her confrontation with Mark was a palpable, toxic thing. It filled the apartment, a stark contrast to the greedy euphoria of just a week before. She jumped at every noise, her phone a dreaded object she now checked not for messages of love, but for threats of ruin. Mark had successfully terrorized her, but in doing so, he had made a fatal miscalculation. He had shown me his hand. He was desperate. A man secure in his position doesn't make threats. He acts on them. His attempt to strong-arm Chloe proved that the money was his primary objective, and without it, he was flailing. He was also reckless. By revealing his suspicion of me, he had tipped me off that he saw through my performance. This was no longer a Cold War. It was an active battlefield, and he had just launched the first clumsy missile. I returned to the apartment after my call with Mark, the silence of the city streets still clinging to me. The fight had gone out of the air. The predatory tension that had thrummed through the rooms since Chloe's return from Mark's loft had dissipated, leaving behind a vacuum waiting to be filled. Chloe was on the couch, curled into a tight ball, a blanket pulled up to her chin despite the room being warm. She looked like a child waiting for a monster she knew was under the bed. She looked up as I entered, her eyes wide and searching, expecting more bad news, more fear. I didn't give it to her. I moved through the living room with a quiet, deliberate purpose I had not possessed in months. The performance was over. The grieving, betrayed fiancé was gone. The architect was here to present the final blueprint. "Get up, Chloe," I said, my voice not loud, but carrying a weight that made her flinch. "Liam, I can't. Now." The single word brooked no argument. She uncurled herself slowly, the blanket falling away. She looked small and pathetic. I felt nothing. I walked to my study and returned with my laptop and a single, thick manila folder. I placed them on the coffee table between us. I didn't sit. I stood over her, a judge presiding over a trial that had already reached its verdict. "The money isn't gone," I said, my tone flat and factual. Her head snapped up, a flicker of wild, impossible hope in her eyes. What do you mean? Did you find it? Did the police?" "I mean it was never there to be lost," I interrupted, killing the hope before it could take root. "There was no inheritance. There was no Valhalla Ventures. There was no hack." Her face contorted in confusion. "I don't understand." "Let me clarify," I said, opening the laptop. I pulled up the first file, a screenshot of our joint savings account from the day I discovered the theft. I turned the screen to face her. "You stole $45,000. She had her regret. It was etched into every line of her body, into the hollow silence of her surrender. It was as I had promised her on the phone with Evelyn all those months ago. Forever." The sound of the apartment door closing behind Chloe for the final time was not a slam, but a soft, definitive click. It was the sound of a book being shut, a case being filed away. The silence that rushed in to fill the space she left behind was immense, but it was not the screaming, agonizing void of the day I discovered her betrayal. This silence was clean. It was sterile. It was the quiet of an operating theater after a successful, if radical, surgery. The cancer was out. I didn't move for a long time. I stood in the center of the living room, my senses hyper-aware. I could smell the faint, lingering trace of her perfume, soon to be vanquished by the simple act of opening a window. I could see the faint indentation on the couch where she had huddled in fear. These were not painful memories anymore. They were data points in a closed investigation. My first action was practical. I walked to the window, unlocked it, and pushed it wide open. A cold, late winter breeze swept in, scouring the room of her scent, of the stale air of deceit. I took a deep breath, the cold filling my lungs, feeling like my first true breath in months. Then I got to work. The deconstruction of our shared life was a methodical, unhurried process. I started with the photos. I took down each framed picture from the walls, the hiking trip, the beach vacation, the silly selfies from happier times. I didn't rip them up in a rage. I simply removed them from their frames and dropped the images into a recycling bin. The frames, good quality ones, I stacked neatly to be sold or donated. They were just objects. They held no power over me. I packed her remaining belongings into the suitcases she had left behind, carefully, almost dispassionately. I didn't sift through them for keepsakes or mementos. I was an archivist boxing up evidence for permanent storage. I would have them couriered to her parents' house tomorrow. Clean break. Next, I addressed the financials. Sitting at my desk,